Okay, let's do some aesthetics from Entanglements, a system of philosophy. Um, Over the decades, I guess I've devoted, much of my career to aesthetics, one way or another. Um, and I defined beauty. I defined beauty in the early 2000s. Gave my little theory, I guess, and art. I guess these are two of the, if not the two central concepts of aesthetics. Um, had a crack at art in my first book, The Art of Living, in the early 90s. I still basically endorse the views of those things that I expressed in those books. Um, so I characterize art in terms of process. I mean, there's a longer, more official type of definition, but I'll just say that art is devoted making. All right, that's awfully general. And one thing you should immediately see is that I don't distinguish art from craft. Um, and I think, in a way, I want to reconnect the concept of art to its origins in, say, the ancient world, uh, and its connections to the similar concepts in many other cultures. I mean, in some ways, I mean, no culture has a concept of fine art similar to, say, the post-Kantian Western conception, um, other than the West. But every culture venerates skilled making in some way. And I define beauty. This is very general, as perhaps too general, but it gets to what I want to get to, as the object of longing. Again, I think of beauty as relational, um, as a situation embedding both the person having the experience of beauty, or the experiencer, and the um, thing that's being experienced as beautiful. And with regard to the experiencer, I focus on the idea of unsatisfied desire or longing. Um, and I'm trying to re-emotionalize beauty, let's say, and also desubjectify it to some extent. All right. I want to read just a passage because I think it's maybe, I hope, an interesting piece of philosophy. It's about how to define a word like art or beauty, or really almost any general term in ordinary language that you're after. All right. This is the way I think about philosophical definition, or I mean, the activity extends beyond philosophy, and it's for one thing, it's an account of what I think I'm doing when I'm defining art or beauty, or knowledge or truth, etc. All right. Um, this is from page 292 of Entanglements. Um, in my time, I've had a crack or taken a stab at both art and beauty. Let me say how I think about my attempts to define such terms or to develop theories of the concepts at issue. I think they are historically unfolding family resemblance terms or open concepts. This is glib because the devil is in the details. Concepts like that unfold thickly with myriad relations to other ideas with which they are constellated and in process, and the concrete activities and objects these objects crystallize or conflate. You're not going to be able to give the all and only definition. Not really. But that doesn't mean you don't feel your way toward a center, toward what you think is the most important or consistent thing the term holds, like a vessel. Take soul as a genre of music. Now, what counted as soul music, or what made something a soul song, was not the same in 1964 as it was in 1973. To try to elucidate the concept, think about what you would say to a sophisticated person who doesn't know what soul music is. The first thing you do is proceed historically, but not only historically. First of all, soul was the term for the dominant African American pop music form in that period. I'd start with the origin of soul as a secularized version of African American gospel music. Of course, one would have to work on gospel then, if you were really concerned to give a full account. The career of Sam Cooke is emblematic, as he made precisely the transition from singing about the love of God to singing about sexual and romantic love. But soul music, after it begins, has a quasi-autonomous history, and it develops in directions not already present in the gospel tradition, even as it feeds back into that tradition. Also, it was a term used in promoting certain sorts of music in the commercial marketplace. The vocal styles originate in the black church, often hoarse, rough, impassioned, unpredictable, with improvisational elements. After you've heard where Aretha takes Think, it seems inevitable, but the first time through it was very surprising, like a Louis Armstrong solo. The instrumentation as it developed was a basic rock unit, electric guitar, bass, drums, and keyboard, and a horn section and backup singers often engaged in very intricate vocal and horn arrangements. Now let's play some paradigmatic examples. Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Betty Wright, Al Green. There, hear that? Soul music is not some eternal form or essence. It was a volatile, developing pop style, different at each moment than it was before, but also subject to a certain continuity. Where soul leaves off and, say, funk begins, really a very difficult question. And if you were completely serious, you'd have to work through dozens of examples and criteria. Reasonable music critics might disagree. It does have to do with departures from the original defining conditions of soul music, and it doesn't follow from its continuity with funk that soul music is an empty phrase, or that people don't know what you're talking about, or that you don't yourself know what you're talking about. In fact, the richness and ambiguity of a reasonably good account show that you do know what you're talking about, for they are inherent in the material. That is more or less the sort of procedure I would try to apply to, say, art, or beauty, or justice, or many other notions. If I started by boiling soul down to secularized gospel music, that would be simplistic, and there'd be many cases left obscure and much, much more to say. But it wouldn't follow that this isn't a useful generalization, or doesn't get at something historically criterial. I also try to convey in a quasi-definitional way why these things matter, as one would in calling soul the dominant black pop style, 1964 to 1973. But even more, as I play the paradigm examples of soul music for you, I'm going to swoon, maybe with a slight exaggeration, to try to convey how great this stuff is, because I don't think you quite get it. Now let's play it again. All right, so at any rate, to my way of thinking, both art and beauty are modes of connection, especially intense forms of connection. Art originally, primarily, primordially, connection with materials of the sort we associate with craft, an intimate relation with materials in which the artist and the materials cease to be distinct from one another fully. Like literally the materials infiltrate your body or poison you, perhaps, if you're an artist. But also modes of connection with other people through acts of communication, which is centrally the activity of the arts, and with the world and with God, if there is a God. Much of the world's art has been made for spiritual purposes. And beauty as well is a form of getting out, is a way of getting outside of oneself, of becoming devoted to things external to the self, right? A mode of loving things and loving the world, a very intense interchange with things in the world. That's why these things are important, and that's why they're examples of the basic structure of entanglements developed across all these disciplines. Now, I also want to say, I devote a fairly large portion of the chapter to a discussion of gender and sexual orientation, I wanted to do something a little fresh with aesthetics. I wanted to do something fresh with every, um, every chapter. And I've spun this off into papers, but it was originally part of this manuscript. Um, the idea is that the best way to understand, or a central way to understand, gender and sexuality as they actually appear in our experience is as aesthetic expressions. Male, female, gay, straight, etc., are aesthetic repertoires that are in continuous volatile development in relation to one another. Okay, so for example, the aesthetic repertoire of a straight man, I think, has been explicitly, for decades, many decades, explicitly constructed in contrast to the aesthetic of whatever gay men were doing at that time. I remember getting gay bashed in North Carolina in 1975, 4, for having long hair and an earring. Okay, come back 10 years later, and those same boys, those same redneck boys rolling around small town North Carolina, are wearing earrings, long hair, smoking dope, okay, acting like the gay hippies they thought I was 10 years before. It's a very volatile vocabulary, gender and sexuality, and what it means to be male and what it means to be female. Okay, these are drawn. I'm not saying there's no biological element or something like this. This is related to Judith Butler's presentation, David Halpern, and others who I discuss. But heterosexual males and females, we've kind of developed our whole identities in a rolling series of contrasts that makes us incomprehensible to one another. Not really, though. But we want to be incomprehensible to each other because we've eroticized differences, aesthetic differences. Okay? That's why we love different media, different, personal grooming habits, different approaches to clothing, different music, or whatever. These are ways we define gender in a heterosexual exchange, let's say. All right? But sameness as well can be eroticized, and often is. Anyway, I'm just scratching the surface of that. We're about to get a storm out here. I thought we had a nice sunny day. As a matter of fact, when we started, it's rolling in pretty quick. So that's a little sketch of some of the material. There's also a tribute to realist painting, Dutch 17th century, and like Philadelphia 19th century, Thomas Eakins, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Harnett and Peto, my favorite trompe l'oeil guys, etc. There's a lot in the chapter, but I think we better call it a day right now. Later on, there's only one left, and that's political philosophy. I'll throw you some anarchism, and then that'll be it.